Okay, now we're recording. Hi, Thomas Cox here. We've just gone through the purpose of the organization and we've just gone through the agenda. I'm now going to ask each of our attendees to introduce themselves in a sentence or two. Just where are you based? Are you working on an academic credential? What are you affiliated with? And what's your interest in our topic, our subject matter of decentralized governance? And I'll be asking for these intros from Brandon, Brendan, JP, Anouk, Darcy, Jana, and Anna, in that order, starting with Brandon Espinoza. Brandon.
Hi, Brandon Espinoza. I'm affiliated obviously with Strong Block. I work with Thomas. We are very interested in trying to bring blockchain to as many projects where it makes sense as possible. And there'll be more that we'll be discussing in future months to come, I'm sure. As far as academic credentials, just a bachelor's degree and about a decade and a half of studying economics since then. So,
and he's hip deep working for a blockchain company right now.
Yeah.
And he's on the governance team working for me. So it's part of his daily life. Next up is Brendan Marquis Towler, then JP, and then I'll go to Ross and on around. So go ahead, Brendan.
Okay, g'day guys. Brendan, I'm here based in Brisbane, affiliated with the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub. I'm currently sort of tossing up where to go next. Strictly speaking, affiliated with the University of Queensland here. I've got a PhD in sort of behavioural institutional evolutionary economics. But really getting into institutional crypto economics at the moment and exploring that at the moment and into the future.
What a sexy thing to say. I'm glad we're recording this because that sounds incredibly cool and I want to talk to you offline. That's going to be JP, then Ross, and then Anouk around my screen. So JP, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. This is JP live from Perth. I'm originally Canadian, spent most of my life in the States, and for about 5 years I was living in Indonesia, in Bali, and became part of an experiment to host a completely Bitcoin-based economy, which we successfully did as volunteers with the Bitcoins in Bali group. It was quite extraordinary. We're only beginning to see similar experiments going on now. That was wonderful. It actually functioned quite beautifully. You could, as a tourist, come and spend a month or more in Bali and spend only your, at the time, Bitcoin. We started the group in 2014 and had this running from 2015 to 2017 when the Indonesian government got really scared and banned everything. So from thence I came to Perth, where I was delighted to discover that there is a hotbed of innovation. I myself am in the kind of emerging technology space, and wherever you've got emerging tech and culture intersecting, that's where you'll find me historically. So I'm a recovering futurist and professional troublemaker. That's me.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. I'm going to go with Ross from Eosphere, then Anouk, and then on around. Ross, you're up.
Hey everyone. So awesome to see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in a long time. I'm the founder of Eosphere. We are EOS.io block producer, also based in Perth. Traditionally, Chris Pollard would have joined this meeting, but he's taken a little bit of a hiatus with a baby coming on. So I have just stepped in to at least probably listen. I'm probably the least qualified for these kind of conversations. I'm certainly more of a technical person, but yeah, looking forward to hearing the conversation and maybe participating a little bit.
I'll actually have during my presentation some thoughts that I would love your input on, actually. So your timing is actually quite perfect. Perfect. Right, so then it'll be Anouk, and then I'm going to go with Iago, and then Alistair, and then Darcy, Jana, and Anna. So Anouk, quick self-intro, please.
Oh, yeah, so Anouk Pinchetti, long history in IT, and I've been obsessed with complementary and alternative currency design for about 20 years. And that's how I got into the blockchain space as a way to start having discussions about how to distribute resources among communities. And I've also been running a working group on currency design for the New Economy Network of Australia, as well as being part of the platform cooperative working group for the same organization. And yeah, just fascinated by the different potential governance systems and designs that are available with the new technologies coming on board today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anouk, for being here. Iago.
Hey, Thomas, thanks. So I'm Iago from EOS Rio. My background, I'm an engineer with corporate finance training and management consulting background, but working on startups for the last 10 years, involved in blockchain for the last 3. I'm a PhD dropout studying multi-sided platforms and how blockchain will impact those. Of course, this have everything to do with how the platform is governed and those kinds of things. And of course, the interest is behind this. And currently discussing a lot of governance and evolving and maturing and listening a lot. Not able to talk at this point, but learning a lot. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Iago is too humble to mention that EOS Rio is technically considered one of the very best EOS Mainnet block producers. They are consistently the shortest compute time and one of the best just all-around technical outfits. And it's no coincidence wearing my EOS Rio shirt. Welcome, Iago.
Oh, that's awesome. I love when you use this. And you're not using the EOS Rio cap this time, which can be confusing. Yeah.
Not at the moment.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would say nice things about EOS Sphere, but I'm going to save that for later. Okay, awesome. Next up with Alistair, Darcy, Jana, Anna. Alistair, please introduce yourself. Again, everyone, please be brisk.
Hi, everyone. Alistair Berg here. I'm one of the research assistants at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub. I'm also a PhD student, primarily interested in identity, supply chains, and of course, governance, which is the purpose of this organization. I'm also one of the founding members of ISSDG, along with Thomas and Jason and Chris and Darcy and a few others.
Great to have you here. Alistair is also our organizational secretary, being the only other officer. Darcy, Jana, Anna.
Fantastic. Thanks, Thomas. My name is Darcy Ellen. I'm an academic economist here at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub. Background is in institutional economics and entrepreneurship. Currently working on blockchain applications to supply chains, to collective decision-making. Just written a manuscript on crypto democracy, which I might try and present some of that work here in the future.
Next month there's an opening.
Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, that's about it. That's a pretty good description. I might turn it over now.
Hi guys, I'm Jana from Germany. I came here 3 years ago to do my PhD in accounting and auditing. Currently working in the blockchain space and started to educate practitioners, so accounting and auditing practitioners on blockchain technology. And there's a lot of interest in that space. So Jason and I will continue doing that, I assume. I'm working for the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub, and also currently I'm functioning as an advisor for a tech startup here in Melbourne, which is called Legerium. And they developed one of the first blockchain-based solutions for accounting and auditing purposes. So I assume I'm the only accounting and auditing person here in this group.
And we require you to put the name of the organization you just mentioned into the Lucid chat, please, if Darcy would type that in, because that's, I want to capture that in the record.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Great to have you here. Anna.
Hi, I'm a research assistant here at the Hub. My
my background is law, so I research law and blockchain issues like regulation and also looking at smart legal contracts. And I've also recently joined Standards Australia in their research committee. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, cool. Because the IEEE Blockchain Standards Group is meeting on Wednesday. So let's you and I connect, please. Who have I not had a chance to give airtime to introduce themselves? Anyone? I got us all. That's outstanding. So I'm going to move onward to the next phase of the meeting. And that was 16 minutes spent and the 5 minutes of intro. So we'll see if we can make the time up or not in the home stretch. I will speak very rapidly as I present my slides, and do feel free to write down your questions and ask them at the end during the round robin, or when I put up the questions slide. So my topic is EOS Mainnet blockchain governance lessons learned through March of 2019. It's currently March 25th where I am, which means I have ample space to learn more lessons with a later date. And in particular, I'm going to tell you some recommendations. But first, I want to say, what is governance? I want every presentation I offer to include this because far too many people don't know the answer. What is governance, broadly speaking? It is a system of making collective decisions. All three of those words are crucial: making collective decisions, carrying out those decisions in a way that's auditable and verifiable and so forth, and then also tweaking the decision-making rules. All three of these fall within the domain of governance. And if you talk about governance globally, you must include all three. For example, let's say you got 20 people somehow all agreed to share 5 large pizzas, which would be a feat in and of itself. But so that's part of governance. You've made a decision. But you now have to carry it out. That is, put the order together, place the order somewhere, pay for it, pick it up, serve it, and so forth, clean up. And of course, you might want to amend the rules by which this decision was made in the first place, because frankly, you perfectly prefer sushi. And so that's, in a nutshell, all the pieces of governance in one example. When we read about governance, however, we do online Google searches, you start to read academic pieces, you almost always see governance used very narrowly to refer to things like corporate governance and board duties and administration and reporting. And that's not incorrect. That's not governance, but it's not all of governance. It is a subset. It is the middle of those three. It's the carrying out. And it's where we get a lot of attention because it's one of the hardest pieces. And so some key concepts, which I will not define in this talk, but which I place as markers to say, if you don't understand these concepts, you will struggle. Key concepts in governance include principles and agents, the distinction between unilateral, cooperative, unanimous, and collective decisions and actions, information asymmetry, contract incompleteness, and friction and the concept of the firm. All of these will have some bearing on some part of your governance journey, although they may not all have equal playing time in today's presentation. Principles and agents, I want to emphasize that this is a nested game that gets played. The shareholders are the principals to the agent, as the board being an agent, but then the board becomes the principal when they hire a CEO who is the agent, and then she turns around and hires staff. So now the CEO is the principal in the principal-agent relationship to staff. So we've already got 3 layers of nesting. And Carver actually has the best treatment of corporate governance I've seen in distinguishing between owners, board, staff, and beneficiaries. And I do highly recommend the Carver approach. And principles and agents are an eternal struggle of self-interest against duty, information asymmetry, and here's the Wikipedia illustration of principles on the left, agents on the right. Principal hire agent, agent performs service for principal, but they've each got self-interest and they've each got access to different information from the other, which can lead to complications in what they should be doing versus what they actually do. So here's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the pre-launch EOS mainnet assumptions and governance, some of the pre-launch planning we did, what we hypothesized the post-launch operations would look like, what the actual post-launch operations actually looked like, some lessons that I've think I've learned and some patterns I suggest people adopt, and some next steps and some risks that I foresee for EOS Mainnet. And I'll do all of that in the remaining 17 minutes. Pre-launch assumptions. This is from January through June of 2018. We assumed that there would be a constitution. The white paper claimed there would be. We believed that token holders would embrace binding arbitration because we talked about it relentlessly for 6 months as a crucial part of the constitutional order. C, that token holders would vote actively and hold BPs accountable to whatever contractual relationship they settled into. And that D, that written or textual contracts like the reg producer Ricardian contract would be enforced by voters as distinct from enforced by code. We had a lot of things that were not code enforced in our governance, and we assumed that activist voters would close that gap. Yes, that's foreshadowing. I want to quickly mention what a constitution is for folks who aren't clear why we need to use that word. We've gotten pushback from people in different language groups that they don't like that word. It's actually a technical term in the collaborative space. If you have a collective and you have an agreement where you unanimously and freely enter into a collective, and we agree to give our group power over us as individuals to reach less than unanimous decisions that nevertheless bind everybody on specific topics using different decision rules, maybe on different topics or topic categories. And then we give the group the power to compel us as individuals to honor the decisions that were reached, even though we were in the minority and voted against it. And we agree in advance to give the group the power to change the decision rules via the same collective process. So that's what a constitution is. It's the technical document that records our agreement as we enter this collective entity, and we create the entity through a constitution, distinct from a charter. So pre-launch planning. Again, January through June, we did a lot of planning that include writing drafts of constitutions and arguing for them and explaining them. Kind of a lightweight version of the Federalist Papers is what I imagine they might be. They were very light compared to those, but there was quite a bit of writing done and a lot of video calls like this one. Arbitration was also socialized and explained to the English-speaking language at least. We attempted to set Schelling points. Since any group could coalesce anywhere, we tried to preset where we think if we all agreed to do X, it would go well, we imagined. So we articulated some Schelling points, things like the Constitution, arbitration being two of them. We wanted to get people to agree that block producers should be subordinate to the Constitution and that voters should see themselves as guardians of a shared set of rules, and that arbitration should be embraced as the primary method of dispute resolution as opposed to hacking or yelling at each other on Reddit. We imagined in the pre-launch phase what post-launch might look like, and what we imagined, our June guesses about July activity, if you will, even though, well, go live was mid-June, but July is when things hit their stride. We imagined that BPs, the block producers, would engage in disputes and that they would then settle those disputes via arbitration. We imagined that their vote selling and cartelization would be minimized through a variety of restrictions in the Constitution and facilities that we thought people would enforce through arbitration. We imagined that any missing governance elements would be launched very soon after the chain launch, that we thought the referendum would be ready by August. At the latest, we thought that voters would start passing referenda to set policy for block producers to then carry out, and that arbitration would be needed rarely and mostly for contract disputes between two or more named parties. That's what we thought. Actual post-launch operations. Well, okay, there was indeed a constitution. It was resisted by some folks. They're like, I never signed this, things like that. Token holders, in fact, rejected arbitration as it was offered via the institution called ECAF. It was criticized, among other things, as being unelected and secretive, even though its alternative, the ICC, which is an existing international chamber of commerce which offers arbitration services, is also unelected and would have been just as secretive from their perspective, since they don't publish in advance who you're going to get as your arbitrator. Token holders have largely ignored block producer behavior. As long as they make blocks and perhaps maybe secretly pay kickbacks, and the reg producer language has largely been ignored when it's not been followed. Now, a lot of the best block producers do follow it. They follow it quite rigorously, but a lot of them don't, and they get away with it. Other guesses? Well, block producers have never used arbitration, to my knowledge, to settle dispute amongst themselves. Any vote selling that does exist is off-chain, which is, I think, virtuous. However, cartels do run the mainnet, according to folks I believe who have given me their analysis of voting patterns and money movements. Those cartels, by the way, do seem to be fairly enlightened. They're running the chain pretty decently well compared to, say, Lisk. Missing government elements were greatly delayed. The referendum was finally in place by January, and it was not really in core code. It wasn't released by Block 1 at all. It was released by EOS Canada and several others, including EOS Sphere. Thank you, Ross. And EOS Rio. Thank you, Iago. Voters have been ignoring referenda. The maximum turnout to date is 2.33%, and the minimum threshold is 15% for anything to pass. So token holders are just ignoring the referenda. And arbitration was immediately swamped after launch with lost key and hacking claims that they arguably should not have taken on, but they were not told not to take them on, and they were chartered as, quote, resolving all disputes on the chain, unquote, and they seemed like disputes and they didn't have any good reason. They couldn't find a good rationale not to take them. And so they felt forced to, which immediately bogged them down in things that they arguably didn't have the competence to take on, perhaps, and certainly didn't have the power, as I will mention here in section 5. Lessons learned. Lesson number 1, there's not enough real staking or automation in the EOS mainnet for my taste. By real staking, I mean this. A block producer can get paid for making blocks. That's called block pay. They also get paid for getting votes. That's vote pay. And these two payment streams serve to keep standby producers who never make any blocks and never get any block pay. They do get vote pay, and that keeps them fed. It keeps them alive and ready to be voted into active service and gives a depth of bench of available block producers. So that's an important part of chain stability and resilience, is to have a lot of standbys, and so the vote pay does that. However, neither block producers nor voters face any risk of loss for violating stated norms. For instance, a block producer can register for free and not even have a node. They couldn't make a block if they wanted to, and yet they still get paid for receiving their votes, and they face zero risk for doing this. Voters can vote for a nodeless block producer. They can do it for free, and they face no risks. Neither of them is doing anything to benefit the chain. They are simply funneling vote pay off to sock puppet accounts who get money for nothing. Disputes cannot be raised and settled programmatically. They must be done manually, and that is broken down. And so real staking and automation would help in each of these cases. Lesson learned number 2, arbitration as an aspect of mainnet was not protected. By that I mean specifically it wasn't protected from certain erosive forces. The protections I now realize would have been helpful would have been, number 1, an exclusion of lost key cases. They couldn't come up with a reason under the Constitution not to take the cases, but if the Constitution had said that the lost key is not an arbitratable problem, then arbitration would not have bogged down with lost key cases. Similar with hacking cases, like who is your counterparty? It's not really a contractual dispute, but it is sort of a dispute. Clarifying the legal status of that and giving the arbitrators some guidance would have been enormously helpful. If they had been reduced entirely to multi-party disputes, that would have been glorious. Number 2, the reg producer contract could have said that block producers must execute arbitration orders. It was in an early draft, but it never made it into the final. And that means that block producers can ignore and have ignored arbitrator orders, which then makes the arbitrators toothless and a subject of mockery, not a good thing in your arbitrators. And number 3, arbitrators weren't funded and could have been funded at launch. No free market for arbitration arose, which led people to feel that the existing arbitration body was somehow a single source of failure or not decentralized enough. Lesson number 3, power matters and so do social values. The community ended up not having any strong shared set of values around enforcing the Constitution via block producer voting, nor supporting the non-automated arbitration scheme. There was no founding myth that people bought into emotionally that would lead them to vote or behave in a way to support those ideas. I tried to set a Schelling point on that, obviously failed. No code-based enforcement was provided. For example, disputes didn't automatically lock up tokens that an arbitrator could then, via multisig, simultaneously render a decision and enforce their own decision by signing something. That would have been glorious, and it would have given the arbitrators muscle. It would have made them equal partners. It also, we failed the Kelsen test of efficacy. If you've read Kelsen, which I've just started to read recently, he's very impressive. He says that a norm is efficacious if it is actually generally followed by the relevant population. And I've got a footnote there that's covered by my my toolbar, sorry. In Pure Theory of Law, and there's a link to the Stanford library summary of his work. So the patterns I recommend that people adopt for governance, I call this one anti-lock, risk, and reward. So Decred does this fairly well, or at least it claims to. I haven't been on the chain myself to prove that it was working, but it seems to be. It's possible to link voting rights to voter risk. That people might ante up, that is, they have to buy a ticket for the right to vote, in a particular period of time or on a particular set of issues. There's now then a locking, that is, the tokens they use to buy the ticket are locked up for a period of time. I believe it's 30 days. For Decred, it could be whatever you like. Then there's need to be an element of risk introduced. That is, if your ticket is drawn and you fail to vote, you lose your ante. So if you aren't prepared to vote, you shouldn't buy the ticket. However, there's a reward. If your ticket is drawn, as a subset of all tickets is drawn, and the subset then gets to vote. If your ticket is drawn and you do vote, you get your ante back and you get paid a reward, which is the incentive then to lock up your tokens and take exchange rate risk and participate and educate yourself as a voter. You're not paid for voting a particular direction, you're paid for the act of voting. Similarly, block producers could be forced to follow a similar kind of pattern to ante up weekly to re-register themselves. Their registry, their ante could be forfeit along with their block producer pay if they misbehave. And there's an example of how that might work. If block producers' daily pay were sequestered in a lockbox for 7 days, and a system were created to allow any two paid block producers, that is, they are at least getting vote pay, even if they're not actively producing blocks. If they're paid block producers, they can file a grievance. They would have to pay money to lock up the target block producer's tokens. They'd have to ante up 1 token for every 100 of the other guy's tokens they want to lock up. And at the time they file the grievance, 7 other standby block producers are randomly selected as a jury and would have 7 days to agree on a 5 of 7 multi-sig basis whether to burn the target's tokens or return them. The plaintiffs never get anything. They suffer a pure economic loss for doing this. We are relying, therefore, on altruistic punishment, which is a psychological feature. And again, I can't promise you that this would work. Selected jurors who don't vote would lose their BP registration for the week. Pattern number 2, multi-sig and time delay. A criticism of EOS Mainnet was that it could, in theory, put a hodler's tokens as someone who just buys tokens and doesn't touch them and doesn't transact on the net. They have no chain activity. There was a theory that such a person could have their tokens placed at risk via theft by arbitration. That is, a bad person would claim a dispute with them, go to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator would use arbitration powers to pry their tokens loose and hand them over. This is considered by everyone I spoke with who knows the slightest bit about arbitration as wildly unlikely, but the unlikelihood was irrelevant because the mere hypothetical threat violated a social norm of crypto that says that HODL tokens should be as close to inviolate as the platform allows. And that issue became an ongoing criticism for the arbitration scheme. Therefore, a norm could be that every contract contain a 203 multi-sig with a named arbitrator. Just by default, you should always do this. And that there should have a time delay in place for any large amount, whatever large means for you. So 10 tokens, no delay. 50 tokens, 5-minute delay. 100 tokens, maybe an hour. 1,000 tokens, maybe a day. some sort of sliding scale, and then allow either party to freeze the in-flight transaction and automatically invoke arbitration, whereupon the arbitrator would be able to render the decision literally via signing a transaction. No block producer intervention required. That could give some teeth to dispute resolution, and that's, by the way, eminently doable today, and several chains do something similar already. Okay, next steps and risks. The EOS mainnet currently is contemplating governance by block producer fiat. Specifically, current BPs, I believe, are agents. They're acting under the Constitution. They've all signed the reg producer contract. That gives them protection, arguably, from liability via contract law and the fact that the current chain states that all disputes are settled by arbitration using uncitral. That's a pretty good legal protection for commercial law. However, EOS New York has offered a block producer multisig transaction that would replace the current constitution of EOS mainnet without following the Constitution's stated rules for amendment. Now, this is a new experiment in what might be called layerless depasse governance. The block producers would then have the ability to use the low turnout referenda to infer voters' preferences, take unilateral action amongst them, and then see how voters react, or if they react, by voting out block producers who may have taken a unilateral action that the voters in retrospect didn't like. So it's, instead of power flowing from token holders, it's the block producer seize power and then get fired if they mess up too badly, maybe. Some further thoughts on that. Well, it's not code is law, but it is asking forgiveness instead of permission. Okay, this is interesting. It could be very cool. It's certainly very fluid. I believe it does introduce some risks, in particular the risk of liability. If block producers do pass such a multisig transaction and they do replace the current constitution, they'll be amending the governance rules without following the current constitution's rules for amendment. This is essentially a coup. This in turn could create a crisis of legal legitimacy. It will certainly strip the protections of default arbitration from all the block producers and anyone else using the mainnet unless they explicitly invoke arbitration in their private contracts. The proposed new EUA, the end user agreement, has no dispute resolution clause in it whatsoever. The block producers would no longer be acting under a written agreement traceable to explicit prior token holder authorization or approval. And therefore, the block producers legally could be seen as de jure in charge of the chain and fully liable in courts around the world. Without binding arbitration, local courts will become the only venue for dispute resolution. My suggested next steps: how do you get a new ratified constitution and maintain the legal legitimacy by following the current constitution's amendment rules? I suggest that Block 1 might want to vote present on all the referenda that include a new constitution. That would give everything a plus 10% turnout, which would take them within striking distance of 15% threshold needed for legitimacy. The top option, now at 2.3%, would then be at 12.3%, and a few large holders away from passing. You vote present, by the way, by submitting an integer other than a 1 or a 0 in a yes/no poll, or just submit an integer that isn't one of the valid integers in a multi-answer question. You are now participating and you show up for quorum, but your answer doesn't count as either a yes or a no. And by voting neither yes nor no, Block 1 would then leave the choice up to the rest of the community, and they would also be signaling the importance of voting. Exchanges and large hodlers could then be privately encouraged to vote. Also, the 15% threshold could be interpreted as 15% of all tokens then voting, which would mean that a Block 1 participation would take it past that threshold immediately. So those are some possible next steps. And now I've got time for questions, and we're at 4:30. We're at 36 past the hour, so I'm going to ask folks to keep themselves to one question each. And I prefer that you type your questions into the Zoom chat, and then I'll call on Brandon to transcribe those into our notes. So if you have a question or several questions, please put them in chat, and I will take them in turn.
Yeah, I would like to say it's also a little bit of feedback too, right? If there's positive feedback or anything that we.
Oh yeah, and we do a round robin as well when you give feedback that isn't questions. you'll certainly have a chance to do that. So we'll give it about 15, 20 seconds of silence here as folks formulate the questions that are questions and aren't just feedback. If you don't have questions, that's fine too.
I do. I'm typing one.
Okay, just a few more seconds if you would, please.
Yeah,
Looks like Anna may have one.
Oh, which chat did you want it in? You want it in?
Oh, either one's fine. Either one's fine. I'll check them both. We actually have both a Zoom chat and a Lucid meeting chat. The Lucid chat goes directly into our record of the meeting, and that's fine. Brandon's question was, do you think the threat of possible public funding of ECAF hang on, I lost it. There we go. Do you think the threat of possible public funding of ECAF via the worker proposal system caused a free market and arbitration to fail to emerge? No, I think the lack of effective demand for arbitration services caused that. I don't think there was enough people with enough interest in enough arbitration services for that to show up. That's my claim. Let's see. JP asked, was there any way to engage the community beforehand? To a limited extent, English language speakers, yes, but a majority of tokens apparently are held by Chinese and Korean speakers who we had a terrible time reaching in the run-up. And even after we went live, I've tried to reach out to large holders and I've had terrible luck getting through to people. A lot of the large holders are essentially investors or speculators who frankly don't want to talk about, how many tokens they have or how they might vote or very much of anything else. So it's been very hard to engage them. Regarding the referenda, that it was ignored. My take on why, frankly, a lot of folks who bought large amounts of EOS and therefore have the voting power in that system never had any real interest in the community aspects that were talked about at great length amongst the smaller token holders, and the idea of it being a community. The big holders mostly just were speculating on tokens. And so the people who had the most power to steer the thing had the least interest in steering, at least at a fine grain level. And yeah, the vote pay without accountability, all I can say is next time better. Next time better. We did manage to avoid a number of errors that cropped up in prior art on Steemit and BitShares. So I think we get a lot of credit for steering away from those rocks. But we didn't miss them all. Coercion of engagement by means of payment. What kind of a culture does this create? I don't know what coercion of engagement by means of payment would mean. If JP, if you wanted to type in something different.
Yeah, meaning that's really just a continuation of the vote pay deal. Like if your culture assumes that the only way to engage people is to pay them,
yes.
What kind of culture does that create? Or did you see it?
It's the kind of win-lose, devil take the hindmost, I'm here for the money kind of culture that we're currently seeing.
Okay.
Big chunks of mainnet. And it's not the culture we imagined. It's not the one we wanted. But we see that all through crypto. Let's see. I've got some questions from Darcy. At what point does arbitration defer to traditional arbitration venues? Basically, anytime you want to. I remember two disputants can at any time move their dispute to a new venue. Even if you named one arbitrator in advance, if you're like thinking, we need somebody who understands commercial transactions involving the transnational shipment of refrigerated meats. and we can't find that person on Mainnet. It's like, fine, go find them. And you can literally at any time change your arbitration venue. We felt that having an on-chain group would help because they would understand EOS. Iago says, regarding BP liability, how big and how real do I believe that actually is? I haven't the faintest idea. I know there have been at least a few people who have lost at least a few $1 million due to block producers ignoring arbitrators' orders to freeze certain accounts that had been hacked. Now, that was done under the Constitution, not under the new regime, so maybe arbitration would still bind them in those cases. But yeah, jury's still out. And to the extent that this is a $1.3 billion market cap chain with millions of dollars worth of transactions on a daily basis, the scope for a block producer to arguably screw up and get, be the only identifiable person that can be pointed at and sued, well, lawsuits love to follow deep pockets. So from the Darcy, Yana, and Anna group, a question, courts, traditional arbitration, negotiations / mediation, in other words, how would one know when total arbitration failure has occurred in the system? Great question. I'm not sure. I would say that we don't seem to have a mature set of disputes working their way through a system or through a process. We have some people who are unhappy, but their situation is opaque, largely because arbitration has been ignored as a venue for resolving things. People try to invoke arbitration, but then other people just ignore it. Are informal experiments conducted to determine what governance models might succeed, that is simulated experiments? Woulda, coulda, shoulda. I encouraged ineffectively the creation of test nets where governance could be tried out. But of course, people's behavior in test conditions may be very different from their behavior in real world. And no, we didn't even do that, which is a shame. Right now, we're mostly learning from other people's live chain experiments like Decred, like Lisk. Lisk is my favorite bad example because they literally explicitly pay people to vote for them. Like, I'm a block producer, vote for me and I'll give you some of my block awards. And it is just a mess. It is just as corrupt as you imagine it would be, from my description. And then Yana asks, from auditors' perspectives, could arbitration create unintended threats to independence regarding financial statement reporting if auditors function as arbitrators? That's out of my wheelhouse. I don't know. I can tell you that public blockchains are public, and anything that's on there is going to be, visible to the world. And so if you use a public blockchain, you better expect that everybody sees your laundry. Beyond that, not much I can say. Have there been attempts to measure off-chain vote buying and log rolling? Not really. There was one whistleblower who published what purported to be a spreadsheet of payments. It wasn't corroborated, and no one took it to arbitration, so there's not been any, subpoenas. Arbitrators can subpoena people. Arbitrators have subpoena powers, they just haven't been used. So, don't know. And have I missed any questions? I think I've got them all. I'm sorry those aren't better answers, but I've given you the best that I can, given my limited knowledge. I'm going to move on now to the next section of our meeting. So we'll make sure to save the notes, and we are in actually the feedback Q&A section. So we've got 14 minutes left. I'm going to ask folks to offer 60 seconds of what'd you like best and like one suggestion for improvement. If that format's okay, let's do that. And I'm going to go clockwise around my display. So I'm going to start with the Darcy room. We'll go Ross, JP, Brandon with an A, Iago, Brendan with an E, Alistair, and I'll end with Anouk. So that'll be the ordering. One thing you liked, one suggestion for improvement. In Brandon's smoking fingers, we'll take all the notes as well as the recording. Darcy, you're up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Thomas. I love the presentation, and my main takeaway from the presentation was that governance turns out to be a really hard thing to do, which is
who knew?
it turns out people do things that you don't expect them to do. I just have a few comments rather than the format that you suggested.
Sure.
I'm going to post a link to a working paper that a few of my colleagues have written, myself and a few of my colleagues. We've tried to develop a theoretical framework around the governance of blockchain dispute resolution, which seems quite relevant. So we've developed a theoretical framework around that to understand the differences between binding arbitration and non-binding and all those different options. So I'll post that as well. The other literature that came to mind, and I know you know the Ostrom literature and so on, but I don't know if you know the literature by Edward Stringham, Pete Leeson, David Scarbeck. There's this bunch of guys and they're working on private governance. It's called the private governance literature. They've done a lot of work in situations where governments either are incapable of regulating or just decide not to regulate at all, and the development of governance solutions to overcome social dilemmas. So some of those things were the development of credit systems in Africa and all these different things. And it just might be super interesting from your perspective as well, because it sounds like you're talking about things like credible commitments and hostages and all of these sort of mechanisms to achieve cooperation. And that's a literature that's working at the moment that might be quite relevant. So I'll leave it there. I thought it was fantastic, and I'll post a few links to those things.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So Jana and Anna, anything?
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really informative. I learned a lot today because I'm kind of new to the blockchain space. As we know, accounting and auditing is closely related to governance, and there's a lot of potential use cases in terms of what I asked you, basically financial statement reporting, the recording of transactions, and so on and so forth. Hence my questions about auditing in relation to governance issues and arbitration. And well, yeah, overall, a great presentation. Thank you. I learned a lot, and I'm going to join you in the next webinar for sure.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for coming. Anna.
Yeah, thank you again. And no substantive comments, just, yeah, I like the structure, the informative aspect, and also the opportunity to ask you questions. I think that works well.
Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence, all of you. So we'll do Ross, JP, Brandon, Iago. Ross, you're up.
Very, very clear summary. That was great. Everything in one place. I can vouch that that's exactly how things played out.
Two of us had the same subjective experience.
I can say that I love this group because there's no emotion. If you get what I'm saying, like when all the groups that I'm in, everybody's involved, and there's neck deep in trying to protect their brand and earn revenue and get their message out. That these conversations don't just they're not all civil. There are lots of people wanting to force their opinion on you and disagree with you. And then a suggestion for going forward, it'll be great if, as when you're talking or whoever's talking, we can all collectively agree that we can do a few little comments as we go along, because there are a few points that, like, Thomas will say something and they're like, oh, or yesterday we did that, and I'll just say, or yesterday we did this and it didn't work either, or something like that, just to bring a little bit of ear
Nice.
to the ground. That would be cool.
Yeah, love it.
Cool.
JP, Brandon with an A, Iago. JP, you're up.
Thanks. First of all, just an excellent presentation, and one of the things that occurred to me is that a fantastic venue for it would be the fuck up nights at startup. It would be really great for you to put this out there for them, whatever you've got going on locally, because I think this would be of value for many people. And then the other thing I wanted to comment, as I'm just starting this, but there was a Medium article, book report on it, and I don't know if the group here is familiar with Charles Vogel's work called The Art of Community, the 7 Principles for Belonging. And there's some really, on the points of engagement and honoring boundaries and preventing what Ross has just said. There's some great insights here. So it's called The Art of Community. The author is Charles Vogel, VOGL.
Super. We'll make sure that gets in the transcript for the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, JP. Brandon with an A, taking notes and commenting. Yes, Mr. Espinoza, that would be you. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I had to undo the mute. No, I was there, through this entire process. Again, I'll vouch for Thomas. I actually got to look at the slides prior to his meeting and talk to him a little bit, or prior to his presentation. It was awesome going through the whole launch process. I know that one thing that wasn't reflected in that it is interesting is that of those who are outspoken about the way governance should be run, I don't know too many that have had a consistent message the entire time. What that means is that some of the key players in this game of the EOS mainnet, their understandings, their opinions, and what they think the right approach is to take has been evolving as it goes. Some of that evolution, I may think is wrong-headed or mistaken. Some of it not, but it is it's been pleasant to see that people are trying to figure this out. And I don't think that of those who were very outspoken before, I don't think that they're as sure of themselves today as they were at the start. And I think that's healthy, and that's a good thing.
Everybody has loud opinions before the things get engaged. Yeah. That certainly includes me. Thank you very much, Brandon, for the thoughts. Yeah. Iago, then Brendan with an E, then Alistair, then Anouk. Iago, you're up.
Yeah, I totally agree with Brandon. It's kind of hard coming after him because I basically agree with the guy's view on governance. I've already talked to him, and as I get more involved in this, and we always try to have technical solutions, and I like the freedom that we can have on EOS. I really like the approach of sorry, Brandon, because I don't know how to say it, but that people can abide to the governance that best suits them without having something imposed on them by anyone. And imposing nothing is still imposing. So it's really hard to try this way, and it's all new for me. I love governance. I don't think this is really important, but I also think that we should have time to mature on things. And maybe I totally agree that we are way more vocal and have more certainties on Seoul and on Shanghai about governance and arbitration and etc. But I really think that we are evolving. This is my first time being part of this. I've watched the previous sessions, and it's great that you're doing this. Just thanks. I totally agree. We have the same subjective experience. I agree with what you said, and it's interesting the point of block one voting to try to activate this. I really think it's a way moving forward, and it's great to discuss these ways moving forward, because governance can be something that drains so much energy and time, and you get nothing out of this in the end of the day. And just doing this, and thanks for the structure as well.
Thank you, Iago, for coming today. Really appreciate that. So we've got about 5 minutes left and 3 speakers remaining for comments before we do our rump business meeting, which will be very short. Brendan with an E, then Alistair, then Anouk. Brendan.
Sure. Thanks very much for the presentation, Thomas, and all of you guys. First of all, I just want to say I really, really love this. I think what you guys are doing is in some ways the logical culmination of the cypherpunk movement, and it's awesome, and I love it, and keep going, please. It seems to me, just on very broad strokes here, there's 2 things going on. The first is sort of mechanism design stuff, and that's sort of the nanoeconomics work, the institutional economics literature that Darcy, Yana, and Anna mentioned. I think there's also a bit of behavioral economics going on here, and it's not a million miles from JP's point. It seems to me that you were really quite surprised by the relative laziness of voters and people who are interacting and getting engaged.
I'm not so surprised so much as hopeful and noticing that my boss was committed to that as a design assumption.
Right. Well, and to my mind, that really kind of speaks to the difficulty of spreading narratives. You mentioned a founding myth, spreading that narrative. So I think that might be something to look at going forward. You know, in 1789, that's Hamilton, Madison, Jay, Washington, the great constitutional debates. I don't know what that looks like in 2019 yet, because this is a sort of postman problem. It's a different world. We have to communicate differently. So I think this actually might be my topic if I give a talk in this setting. How do we approach that? I've tried to have a shot at that in some papers in the Journal of Institutional Economics. How do we spread narratives? But I think that might be something to look at going forward, is how do we spread that narrative to generate the common desire to engage with this project and contribute to building the platform.
Super, thank you very much. Alistair, please.
Okay, so thanks, Thomas. I'll just second everything that everyone said in praise of your talk. So it's been very interesting to see your summary of the EOS journey. I've spent a bit of time with Ross and the EOSphere gang, so it's been nice to hear that from your perspective. One thing which I'll briefly talk about, and this follows on from what you were talking about at the start of your talk, where you were basically defining governance and talking about what governance was, but and this is just a question of language, but it may be of interest to you. So when you talk about governance, this is what a lot of economists would just call institutions. So this is just a different use of language, which may sort of expand the topic for us a little bit. So this is a lot of what Douglas North, Nobel Prize winning Douglas North, was talking about when he was talking about institutions, which are both informal mechanisms as well as formal mechanisms which constrain human behaviour and restrain the choice set. So these are informal, as in their culture, they're the norms which people operate within, but they're also the formal things like constitutions and laws and things like that. And I guess this is just the nature of a technology like blockchain, which brings together obviously computer scientists, it brings together elements of political science, it brings together elements of computer science, game theory, mechanism design, all that sort of stuff. So when you're bringing together so many different disparate scholarly backgrounds, you're going to get very different uses of language. So I think it's just important to consider that when we're talking about governance, we're also talking about institutions as well. They're one and the same thing. But apart from that, very enjoyable talk, and thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. And Anouk, you are the final commenter.
Well, I'd like to third everything that's already been seconded 5 times. Great stuff, very dense. So I think we could, sit here together and unpack it for hours on end, because every single element of whether it's the voter apathy or whether it's the lack of binding arbitration, all of these can be teased out over many, many hours. I commend you on your ability to try and stick it into a 1 hour time frame. Not easy. I think for my sort of takeaway is the limitations of economic incentives only. If you are counting on non-economic incentives, but you don't specifically build them in,
or recruit for them,
and I think that's there's a lot there to unpack, and that sort of goes into the same dichotomy that Brendan was speaking of in terms of the founding myths. I much enjoyed hearing that reference, because it's crucial in order to get a community rather than a group of random strangers trying to get the highest buck.
Yeah.
But that's it. I think, as I said, there's so much to unpack over so long. I won't do that. I'll let us get on to business. Thanks.
Brilliant. So we're at the 1 hour mark, and I'm happy to have folks drop off if they need to. Anyone who would like to stick around and have a quick business conversation, would love to talk about who the next presenter needs to be, And if we get input on next meeting date, great. Otherwise, I will simply pick one because as president, I have the power to do that. I also own the Lucid Meeting account. So I'm not afraid to flex my muscles there. Week of April 15th or week of April 22nd. Any preferences? Bye, Anna. Thank you so much. Bye, Anna.
Bye.
Anybody got any strong preferences one way or the other? Is anybody
sorry, I missed that. What were those dates again, Thomas?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Week of April 15th or week of April 22nd. Those are the two choices. And it'll almost certainly be a Wednesday, which would be Thursday morning for the Aussies. So that
15th works better for me.
Which one?
15th, week of the 15th.
Week of the 15th, that'd be Thursday morning, the 18th for you. Wednesday afternoon, the 17th for me. Okay, no one's turning purple on the
unfortunately,
face.
I can't make that one, but I also can't make the week after. So let's just keep going with that date. It's because that's just right before Easter. I don't know if that affects many people, but if anyone's going away or anything, but all good.
So Wednesday the 17th / Thursday the 18th. And that means, Darcy, you're not presenting either. Alistair, can you present next time?
I won't present next time just because I'm gonna volunteer either Chris or Jason.
Oh yeah, right. I remember. Yeah,
I can do that.
Yes.
No, but I know Jason does want to. I think Jason does have something up his sleeve, at least ideas up his sleeve.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? Al, is the 18th the date of our empirical science workshop, which would rule out Jason and Chris?
Actually, sorry, yes, it is. Actually, that's going to rule out all of us. Whoops. Sorry.
Oh, so
yeah, sorry about that. One of my suggestions was going to be rather than at the end of the calls trying to get a date then and there. I really liked when we all voted on the date because that
online. I'll do that. I'll set up the voting.
Have a,
if you attended, you will get a ballot. If
Thank you very much.
I will ignore you. Brilliant. So we'll do that. Anything else on speakers? We'd like to schedule out more than just 1 month. So if folks have thoughts on particular people you'd like to see invited, stick a name in chat or just blurt it out verbally. Or if
I'd love to see Brendan Marquis Tower present at some point, if he's happy to.
Yes.
Who is on the line?
You've been named, sir. Consider yourself the speaker for May.
Oh, all right. Thank you for volunteering me, Darcy. I like to think of something to talk. I might actually. That's good. I might take on that narrative crypto economics idea.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be something entirely new. I mean, you can do a presentation that you've done elsewhere.
Yes, sure.
And the presentations have so far, just for context, because some of the people here haven't been in previous ones, there has been presentations on a whole range of different topics. It doesn't specifically have to be on the governance of a blockchain.
Sure.
There's a much broader scope than that.
Cool beans. Well, mine will be on that anyway. So I shall get to thinking about it.
Brilliant. Love it.
So who's the speaker for next month, for April?
If we could perhaps put down either Jason or Chris, and I'll confirm with them. I'll speak to them this week just to clarify that. But I know that they both have stuff that they'd like to present, so I'll put it to them.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, Alistair, if you'll let me know which of the two, once we get that nailed down, that'd be great.
Will do.
And then if we just list both their names as the two contenders in the notes, that would be outstanding.
Yep.
If now's the time to bring up just a quick order of business, this is just a suggestion for future ISSDG calls. My suggestion would be for future calls at the start when we're introducing people, it might just be an idea to have people who are new to the calls introduce themselves. Because as these calls tend to, that more and more people tend to join these
It'll
calls.
become unwieldy.
I think it's just becoming
Arguably,
unwieldy.
it was unwieldy today, yes.
Yeah. Perhaps
I'll take blame for that.
Yeah. So Thomas, I think it's great that you actually introduce ISSDG and say this is what we are, this is what we're doing, etc. But just perhaps new people.
Yeah, I'll take responsibility, Brandon, if you want to make a note of that. I will come up with a cleaner intro format and process.
Yeah.
Super. Okay, is there anything else that for the good of the order must be brought up? Otherwise, we'll move on to section 5 of the meeting. I think Brandon will navigate us forward as soon as he's done with his notes. And so it looks like we're going to vote on the next meeting date and time, so I can't review that. We have no other ISSDG announcements. ISSDG membership is still free because I have a bank account. So enjoy that while it lasts. And if you have one suggestion for improvement, when this meeting closes, a screen will pop up if you're in the Lucid meeting, which you should be. When we end, you'll get a pop-up of rate the meeting, please 5 stars. I love those 5-star reviews. And more importantly, write in something that as an improvement point or something you really liked, just in terms of the format and the style and the way the meeting was conducted. That would be awesome. That feedback helps us improve continually. And with that, it looks like no one has any urgent suggestions for additional conversation. Therefore, I declare this meeting adjourned, and I thank you all very much for attending. We will see you next month at meeting number, I believe it's 6 coming up. This was meeting 5.
This was 5, yep.
This is 5, meeting 006 in April. Thank you very, very much. Tell all your friends to come here in April. Alrighty.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Very much.
Bye.
Yeah.